What's up, y'all? It's Colin. Hope everyone's staying safe and sane as we enter, in a lot of places in the United States, a month of quarantine. I'm with your boy CK, Christian here. How you doing, man?
Doing all right, man. Trying to hang in there, but the time at home is definitely taking its toll.
Yeah, you going a little stir crazy?
Just a little bit, but, just trying to feel blessed and stay humble.
Yeah, man, you've been enjoying that rooftop a little bit? I've been getting some sun. Molly and I have been fucking around in the yard and stuff.
It's definitely nice to not be in like a tiny dark studio, so I'm extremely thankful that I'm not in that situation.
Yeah, man, it's a good time to count your blessings, but I'm like you, I've been vibing a little bit, but I'm getting ready for it to be over.
We had a good podcast today, though. Why don't you tell them about the convo with Pascal?
Yeah, man, it was a great podcast. We had Pascal Huegli on, Chief of Research at Schlossberg and Co. Management Wealth Company. And yeah, we talked about MMT, where the Federal Reserve and United States monetary policy is going. And, if it could potentially lead to a bifurcation of the monetary base where you have, where you have people using soft currencies like the dollar, fiat currency, for certain like everyday expenditures and in certain aspects of the economy. And then you have them using hard assets like Bitcoin and gold and other parts of the economy, maybe large luxury expenditures or for savings accounts. And it was a really cool conversation. I'm really excited for y'all to dig into it. But before we do that, we've got to give a shout out to our sponsors. First up is Swan Bitcoin. Swan Bitcoin is an auto sat stacking service that allows you to seamlessly dollar cost average into Bitcoin with ACH deposits, available in 49 states, super low fees, lowest on the market, and I mean that. If I'm wrong, someone fact check me. Pretty sure that's right. Check them out. Awesome service. Know the guys personally. They're good, true Bitcoiners. SwanBitcoin.com. Sign up. Start stacking sats for low fees today.
Awesome. Next is Etoro. So Etoro, they've been sponsoring a ton of different podcasts and content creators in the space, and they wanted to sponsor WTF because we're educating people about what is happening with our money and why we need to look at an alternative, a plan B. Etoro, for those of you who don't know about them, they started off as a traditional financial company, and they quickly saw the benefits of Bitcoin, and they incorporated Bitcoin into their model. And since then, they've been full steam Bitcoin and crypto. So in the US, they have the number one trading app. It's a one-stop shop. You can buy and withdraw your Bitcoin. You can trade it. You can go copy trade. You can buy shitcoins if you want. We don't recommend that here, but it's everything you want in a trading platform. For those of you who want to trade, check out Etoro, etoro.com.
All right, y'all. Well, let's go ahead and dive right in. Hope you enjoy it. What's up, y'all? Welcome to the next episode of What the Fuck is Happening with the Fed. I'm your host, Colin Harper, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Pascal Huegli, all the way from Switzerland. How you doing, Pascal?
Hey, Colin, I'm good. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
How's the pandemic in Switzerland?
Well, yeah, we're all stuck at home as well. Our government also told us to stay home, but it's kind of loose. Like so many people are actually not following the orders, And I mean, Switzerland is still really cautious when it comes to that kind of thing. I mean, the government wouldn't ban going out completely or something because they know we are still free thinkers, maybe more than in other governments. So it's actually good currently.
That sounds a lot like some of the reactions in the South. Like in Tennessee, our governor has, issued a stay-at-home order, but no one's really following it. People are still going out. They're wearing masks and things, right? And they're trying to social distance, whatever that means. But you're also starting to see kind of what you were saying. The government doesn't really want to piss people off too much. You're seeing in the UK, in Kentucky, one governor has really kind of it's either a governor or a mayor. I think it might be a mayor. Overstepped her bounds, and some of the local police force are saying they're not going to comply with some of her mandates, which is interesting. You don't really see stuff like that very often.
We also have police trying to carry out orders, but sometimes they're even laughing about it themselves. They're coming up to him okay, never mind, and they're going away again. So even they don't really care. So.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's crazy times.
Sure it is.
And that's part of the reason why we're having you on to talk today. Before we kind of get into MMT and the subject of the podcast today, I kind of want you to give your background and what brought you to Bitcoin, what your interests are with Bitcoin and macro finance.
No, like originally I was just like a student of Austrian economics, way back at school or in university. I actually studied like politics and economics, and I didn't really get to know that there's another school of thought, with the Austrians. So my free time, I started studying them, and then, at some point I also discovered Bitcoin, and I thought, oh, that's really interesting. Something that's trying to put all this theory that I've been learning into practice. And then as many people, I didn't just dive right in from the start, I was kind of skeptical first, and then I didn't buy my first Bitcoin until like 2016, but then I got ever more deeper into it, and nowadays I find it so fascinating, that we have now that the world's getting ever more crazier, or getting ever crazier. I think it's all good that we have that tool at our disposal, because otherwise I'm not really, I don't really know if I could stay that sane without it.
And we'll get into, I think, that idea of the alternative later with our kind of theory on the bifurcation of the monetary or of monetary system and monetary bases and monies and currencies. But to kind of pivot to what we want to focus on for the podcast, MMT, modern monetary theory. We were talking a little bit about it on the phone, and it's something that's starting to become more and more relevant because we're starting to see kind of the foundations of it and some of what central banks and the Federal Reserve is starting to do to support financial markets. You had some interesting theories on the phone. So to kind of start our conversation, can you give our listeners a rundown of what MMT is, and talk about what you were saying to me on the phone yesterday, how this theory is, people think it's new, but it's actually been around for quite some time.
Yeah, sure. No, I've been studying MMT for quite a while because I also work as a research officer at Schlossberg and Co., which is just like, a money manager at the end of the day, but we're focusing on how the world changing so that we can allocate our stuff accordingly, And there I've been really reading up on how all the history and of money, and you come across MMT, and the really interesting thing that it wasn't called MMT like many years ago, It's only now that they call it modern monetary theory, but actually it's not really modern. It's already 200 years old. We had back in Germany, we had an economist, he was called Georg Friedrich Knapp, and he was a German economist, and he was actually the one who the first time systematically, I would argue, really laid out that theory. It's called the state theory of money, and there he argues that money, as many other people were looking for it, what is money? He just bluntly said, look, it's as easy as that. Money is just a creature of the state. And so he kicked off a real debate that was going on back then, also with the Austrians. For example, Karl Menger was an opponent of his, and they had some really great fights, Karl Menger being the founder of the Austrian school, and already back then, many people were saying, this is just weird, and it's just hilarious. You can't really argue that because back then the state wasn't that developed. It was just a lot weaker than today. And obviously when you look at it from today, there weren't really good arguments speaking for MMT,
And so let's kind of define a little bit what MMT means. The statement that always comes to mind for me that I think beautifully encapsulated is the United States government can buy anything priced in its currency.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you go back, as Knapp argued, it's money is a creature of the state, and then it's money is or the government is monetarily sovereign. Whenever he can print his own currencies, he can buy anything with his own currency. As long as his debts or its debts are in his own currency, he can always pay back his or its debts, So this is also something we have to keep in mind. But eventually it's just saying that you want to merge fiscal and monetary policy at one point, because nowadays, the system is that you still have private banks, you have a whole financial system. And whenever a state wants to go into debt and wants to spend money, he needs to go, or the government needs to go to the market, the private market, and there he needs to place his debt, And that is actually what MMT wants to do away with. They're just saying, let's just put the Fed and fiscal and monetary policy in one thing united, and then the state can do whatever he wants and has no boundaries anymore. And I think that is really what it's about. I mean, people often are confused and saying, so what are we paying taxes for? And MMT guys are saying, well, taxes are not here to fund the government. They're only here to actually, steer and manage everything. But taxes, like a state can do completely without taxes because he can just finance himself just the way he wants, So that's actually, in a nutshell, what MMT is about.
Federal governments and their central banks can basically assume any debt that they want because they can buy anything that's priced in their currency, and they don't have to worry about defaulting on debt because they're the government. Like you were saying, money is a creature of the state. The currency that the government controls is completely sovereign. They can do what they want with it, buy whatever they want because they control the currency. And you're starting to see the roots of this being laid with this idea of perhaps the Federal Reserve will start buying all types of assets that are already opening liquidity valves for just about everyone, even people in foreign markets. Who knows what they'll start buying when things get really bad.
True. I mean, nowadays you have in the market, the Fed, it actually puts a backstop to everything, so everything just ultimately depends on the Fed. I would argue some time ago, it was really the case, or people thought of that whenever state wants to go into debt and it wants to finance stuff out in the economy, it has to use its banks, it has to place its government bonds into the hands of private bankers who then buy these and they give credit to the state, and eventually they also get paid for that, but there's always this intermediary level, and so you never had the state really directly financing everything. But nowadays that the Fed, on behalf of the state starts really financing and monetizing everything, and at the end also takes all the government debt on its balance sheet, then some MMTers just argue, hey, what's the deal of all this? We could just do away with all this because we wouldn't need all the bankers anymore, all these private institutions, the bankers only enriching themselves. We could just have the state on its own finance everything, all these banks.
And we were talking about this yesterday, about how, per the Cantillon effect, part of the reason why the Federal Reserve System is so broken right now is because all of that wealth gets dammed up and absorbed by the first injection point, which is the big banks and all of their corporate lines. And as we've said, and others have also said, you could just give that money directly to the people and ignore the bailouts and, have a bankruptcy process and have someone buy the assets. But obviously, that's not how it goes.
Well, yeah, I think that's really an argument that's going to resonate with many people. As you said, I mean, you have this Cantillon effect, which is also by a really great economist close to the Austrian school, who described really that money is going into the economy and it first hits the banks and all the people close to where money is issued, And so they on the way that the money trickles down, into the economy, all these banksters and private people there are really enriching themselves, and I think especially the left, is criticizing that for years. And we also see the scissor between poor people and rich people. I mean, they're richer ever more,
We're talking yesterday about how you pointed out how some of what MMT proponents are saying and some of what Bitcoiners and Austrians are saying are actually agreeing on certain problems. They're identifying the same problems, but the solutions are different. And I was talking about as well this idea that I think a lot of people on the left, especially, a lot of Austrians, libertarians often get paired on the right side of the political spectrum. We kind of get typecasted as being cranks, but the left is pointing out a lot of the problems that we're pointing out. They're just kind of not totally understanding what the solutions could be or where the real source of the problem is. Anyway, I thought that was an interesting point that you had about MMT proponents and Austrians thinking similarly about the same thing.
Yeah. They're really close when it comes to analysis, they identify the same problems, but then when it comes to solution, that they're going directly opposite ways. I mean, Austrians and Bitcoiners, they want to go more into the money needs to be scarcer because that's why we have these problems in the first place, because money is not scarce. And I mean, Taylors, they're going down the other way, saying no, money needs to be even more loose, even less scarce. And that's why we need to pump even more money into the system. So there you then see the bifurcation and also the divergence of these two theories. But in the analysis, they're quite close to each other.
Fiat is not just about trust. You have this thesis that you really kind of wanted to highlight, and I think this is kind of a good segue for what you were just talking about, of just pumping more dollars into the system, because as we were talking about, it's all about liquidity right now, and that's cash is king because of that liquidity profile.
Yeah, you can really see this right now. Our system is so leveraged up, so everyone is like really scrambling for liquidity and it's really going after liquidity. But my argument, I'm often talking to people also like from the Austrian side and sometimes even from MMT side, and they all tell me, or like just normal people just tell me, look, money, it's all just an illusion and it's all only based on trust. I think whenever we lose trust, like money loses all its value. And I would argue it's not only about trust. What these people miss is that today's money, even fiat money, it's also a lot about incentives, And what I mean is that there's a demand for dollar because there's so much dollar debt. People actually have an actual demand because they got to service their debt. And also it's the way that like nowadays when money is issued, when government bonds are issued, that then trickles down because like money gets into the system. There are private investors buying these bonds, with an incentive to profit, and so you always have like a backstop of people buying that fiat money and also the debt behind it because they want to profit, because the state can just loot. So like as a private investor, you can benefit in the state's looting of your fellow citizens and yourself. And that's a great incentive today for many people. And I think when that falls away, because MMT is it's not going to the market anymore and it's just finances everything by itself without debt anymore, then I think we actually have this problem that this whole incentive structure that today is really distorted, but still kind of, I would say, keeps up the whole system as well. If that falls away, then money becomes even more based on trust. And then I would argue that's not really great for MMT because then, as we know, there's no much really no value left. And
when you're talking about money being about incentives, well, when the average American especially thinks about their stimulus check and the idea that maybe they'll get more, maybe what the Democrats are talking about, $2,000 a month, maybe that will happen, right? And if you're talking about an incentive system and what you were talking about earlier about, people will like this, people will like hearing, hey, instead of the banks getting money, you will get the money and they will back it and they will be for it. And at first, it will be a sweet deal, and they will like it. Once the inflation really kicks in, the trust in the currency will be broken because their purchasing power will be eroded.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a good argument. It's just like the sweet pie that you're becoming, but you're not really recognizing that it's full of like poison, and you're just tasting it and you're saying, wow, that actually tastes really good. But in the end, once MMT really gets like on the ground, and it gets implemented the way MMT want it to be, then the money system fundamentally changes on the ground on a really basic level, and then I would argue you would really have the state just issuing all the currencies, dashing it out to all the people, and they would maybe initially like it, but then would recognize ever more that money gets ever more soft, and that's not a good thing in the end. Productivity and everything is being lost because your money loses value even more than today, and you will then see all the bad consequences like later on, like down the road, and that will drive them away, I would argue.
I do kind of want to return to this idea. It's becoming clearer to the average citizen, not just in America, but in, the world at large, that obviously the system is unjust. Both sides of the spectrum, the left and the right, are saying it's unjust. They're coming to different conclusions about how to fix it. Once the Fed really starts ramping up the printers for everyone, what ends up happening to the money supply? What ends up happening to people's perception of money? Will we actually finally see this flight into Bitcoin and harder assets like gold?
Well, I would argue for sure. I really think it's going down the route of that we're having two different systems that are really driving or like diverging apart. I think the only project that could really unite a big mass amount of people would be a state, like a good, well-behaved state that was really like well acted out by people could potentially do this. And this was always the project of the state. The government will unite all the people along one unified goal. But nowadays, government is so like distorted. And as we said, like the money is distorted. So government, there's just the baddest incentive ever, or like the worst incentive ever. So it's not going to happen, that a state will be great enough and will have the power to unite the people back under one umbrella, So I think there you will have ever more two groups, like diverging out into their own worlds, and you will have the world of soft money, the state-run money, and you will also have the world of like the hard money. And I think there Bitcoin will really play a big part, with this whole new idea, the whole financial system that can be like built upon Bitcoin to really then have a new system in a new world. And I think people will just go back and forth, whenever you got to go back to the old system, the soft state-run money system, they will go there and have some of their expensive state-run money.
You could conceivably imagine a future where the government is paying universal basic income to its citizens, and they use this universal basic income to pay for things like rent, to pay for things like perhaps groceries, basic necessities. And then, as you said, they have their hard money and an entirely different financial system that complements this hard money and a different monetary base that they use for other things, perhaps high dollar expenditures and planning for the future and things like that.
Yeah, I think like all the smart entrepreneurial people, that have some entrepreneurial spirit left and that also have some like courage to go the second mile, they will discover Bitcoin and they will find that they're for some purposes, like you said, like savings and just like projects that are really of meaning, they will be financed in that world, and they will be like really built in that world. And the other system is just going to be a really sad system. It's just still going to be there, just like back then at the church, that church now is still also there. But I mean, it's just one of many great institutions that we have, and I think the state will really lose much of its power because it's just going to be one among many. And I think there will be a problem that it will see that people will pass its currency just as fast as they can get rid of, like a hot potato, and only use it when they need to.
One thing that I've kind of been harping on is America has seen record unemployment so far, but we haven't even seen the worst of this crisis. And I think one thing that you're going to see is like once the emperor is truly naked, a lot of what people would call cranks, a lot of what they've been saying for the past decade will be seen by people to be some sort of truth, right? Or it'll be verified and they'll be kind of vindicated for these beliefs that everyone called fringe for so long. Because people think about our system and they don't think that perhaps this system is experimental. And we're about to see a very experimental system once MMT truly takes hold. And one thing that I really want to be on the lookout for, and wanted to see if you have anything to comment on, what happens when the Federal Reserve, like what happens if we do get this digital currency system and that people can just open bank accounts directly with the Federal Reserve?
Yeah, I think that would also be like something that's really, as you said, that we need to look out for, because it's also a logical step, I would argue, in the end, that it's also like you have like a whole theory on that, the sovereign money theory, which is kind of like aligned with MMT. These guys, sometimes they look at it a little different, more different, but I mean, eventually it comes down to the same thing, and there you would really also have like a state issuing money, distributing directly to all the people. They could also like circumvent banks, commercial banks wouldn't be needed anymore. Eventually, if you have that system, as you already know, and many of the listeners are probably aware, if it's a digital currency that is being planned, I mean, the government can more easily control its citizens then, because, you have like the perfect surveillance means at your hand, And I would also think that when government is the only, or like a government bank is the only institution that issues money, government will become even more politicized, I mean, then lobbyists and just people who really want to be at the lever, who want to be the ones that can decide where the money goes. Because I would think that even in that system, government would not just hand out money to everyone, it would still be a fight for money. And I think this fight will just be greater. And as I said, everything will just be politicized. And I think that's not a great development. And you will see that cultural like divides and riots on the streets, because like everything is getting more like politicized, and also ideologies that are being strengthened along the way, And I think that's not a good sign.
Yeah, as Nick Carter says, if you're not radicalized, you're not paying attention.
Yeah,
which I think is just like a great take on it. Also just like a pretty pithy statement. But people really are starting to pay attention, I think. And this is something that what you were just saying, I was talking to my dad about a year ago when I was really trying to because, I got into Bitcoin after I graduated college, and I'd always known about it and always thought it was pretty cool, but had never had time to really fuck with it and just never paid it any mind when I was in university. And I got into it after I graduated, started writing about it. And, my dad understood it because I'd always talk about it with him. I was really trying to make him understand why it's important. And one of the things that really made it click for him was when I said, when the Federal Reserve when the Federal Reserve controls your bank account, you're going to wish you had Bitcoin if you don't. And that's what really made it click for him. And I think that's going to make it click for a lot of people. Some will be fine with it. I think a lot will not.
That's what I also find so fascinating about Bitcoin, because it's just like an organic adoption that is happening, because people start wondering and they start asking questions. And then because oftentimes with government and fiat money and all these systems pushed upon you, it's imposed on you because it's by some kind of coercion in the end, I would argue. And with Bitcoin, it's just the other way around. I've been talking to many friends for years, and in Switzerland, we still have the luck of having it really great compared to our neighbor countries. And then people always come up to me and say, hey, why do I need Bitcoin for? Everything is fine, but maybe at some point things aren't going to be fine anymore. And we're seeing already signs of that it's all over the world. It's going to get tougher. And whenever you're then confronted with these tough things, tough consequences and stuff, you will start asking questions, and that will really drive yourself towards things like Bitcoin. And that's why I find it so interesting. It's an organic way of growing, and that's also how we're going to see ever more adoption of Bitcoin. It's not imposed on us, but it's really, eventually you could argue it's imposed by the state because he's just the one doing all the mess, and then we have to somehow flee, into Bitcoin. But I think still it's really coming out of your own interest. You want to.
Right. And as you said, if money is about incentives, then Bitcoin is the king of incentives. And eventually, we haven't seen it yet, but you're not going to see, basically monetary subversion happen overnight. But when eventually Bitcoin does start holding against all the chaos, we're not going to seem as crazy. I think the day is coming, man. I can't wait for the day that I can pin the op-ed. It finally happened. Maybe I'm getting a little too ahead of myself.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm also sometimes really having in my thought, how it's going to be if Bitcoin is really going to trump everything. And I'm a little, sometimes I also have to caution myself, it's not going to solve every and each problem, but still, as I said before we started recording, I'm really happy that Bitcoin exists, because otherwise I would know if I could still stay that sane, without it, because it really is a force that gives you hope in this really rundown system. So, but still, it's probably not going to be the end as well. Humanity is ever gonna progress, and Bitcoin is just one big part in it. And that's the interesting thing.
Are you, or were you a gold bug before you got into Bitcoin? Yeah,
well, originally, whenever you deal with Austrian theory, you're also getting into gold, and I liked gold before. It was also back in university, and I didn't have any money to then really put into gold, as many young people don't have, but theoretically, I was really, really on gold, and still nowadays, I would argue, you have to still diversify your portfolio, because as you argued, our system today is also doing a huge experiment. This is also why you should really get out of fiat, maybe not completely. That's also obvious, I would argue, because just put your eggs in as many baskets as possible, and there I think Bitcoin, gold, and some other real values, also brush up on your knowledge. This is probably the best investment that you can do. That's why I've always also been fond of gold, but as a matter of diversification.
Is there anything in your research that you've seen and any trends that you've kind of keyed in on that you're kind of looking at or kind of keeping an eye on?
Well, I mean, it's really what we talked about, as money managers, eventually we just want to see where things are going, because in the end, we want to how would I say, protect our assets, the assets of our clients. And I think it's in times like these, it gets ever more tougher. But it's also really interesting, I would argue, but still, I mean, you have to be today it seems kind of like you have to hold everything, but at the same time, you don't want to hold anything, because you never know which way it's going to go down, and I mean, as we've seen with this crisis, also we had to switch into government treasuries in the end because that's what saves us a lot of money, but still, I mean, in our research, we never want to rule out the case that maybe one day government bonds, which are the risk-free asset of our today's system, are maybe not going to be worth anything anymore. So you also have to diversify. And that's why we also already are looking at Bitcoin. Not that we as a professional money manager would put all our eggs into Bitcoin, but still, that's why also great research is really important, that you can stay on top of the curve.
Bitcoin as a hedge, is that starting to come up more and more with money managers, like in the circles that you run with? Are you starting to see that?
Yeah, sure. That's what we're seeing. I mean, we had big discussions now, because Bitcoin dropped. So in the crisis, many people said, oh, Bitcoin has not been the safe haven, what everybody expected it to be. But I mean, the smart people already knew that Bitcoin, just because it actually reacted the way, it shows that it's already this asset, which is highly liquid and that you can liquidate into the market immediately to cover all your other margin calls, and this already shows to smart people that Bitcoin is developing into this really great, I would say, safe asset, that is really another risk-free asset, in a new system, which is the Bitcoin system. I think that's something that we've compared to 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, people, they were still a lot more skeptical, but nowadays, I mean, people look at Bitcoin really with that eye, of seeing it as a potential, maybe a speculative asset that could be potentially become this really safe haven, but they're already considering that. And I think that's really interesting. And also many young people, that approach us and they want to invest, and the first thing they say is just, hey, I want to go into Bitcoin, because that's what I want. And then the other things that can come afterwards, and that's also really interesting because with older people, it's sometimes the other way around. And with the younger folks, it's really Bitcoin first and then the other things second,
For sure, man. And I think that, it's only going to become more relevant in the portfolios of some of these, of the clientele of these wealth managers, because, millennials and Zoomers will get it. Gold bug boomers get it, which is nice. But it's just really exciting right now. I think one of the themes throughout this podcast series has been, a lot of the stuff that the Austrians have been screaming about for decades is really kind of starting to come to pass. I mean, what a time to be positioned with it, with Bitcoin, going into another halving, a lot of narratives at play, and everyone's just watching and waiting to see what's going to unfold. I mean, we're really undergoing a paradigm shift.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the narratives are really strong. That's what you said. I mean, what I find so interesting is this mimetic pull force that you see around Bitcoin. Everybody is really, it's this FOMO thing, that we saw in 2017, 2018, but already now before the halving, I have just friends coming up to me and just telling me, hey, should I invest in Bitcoin? I think this question is going to be the most relevant.
Same,
question.
Man. I've had more interest from friends than ever before, and I'm seeing people on Twitter say the same thing. And one of my buddies who I've been talking about Bitcoin with for a while said, he said, help me buy Bitcoin. I want off this hot air balloon.
Yeah,
and I
sure.
said, well, damn it, buddy, if that doesn't just sum it up. But it's kind of crazy how many accounts there are of that.
Yeah, that's been growing, and I think that's not going away. It's not that it's this one-time fad, and I mean, people now know that Bitcoin is here to stay, and it's not here to stay; it's here to grow. And that's what I find so interesting. So the most defining question will be, I think, of this decade, and maybe in the next one will be, do I have to Bitcoin, or when to buy Bitcoin? And that's also what's making me kind of bullish on the asset.
Absolutely, man. Well, hey, Pascal, thanks so much for coming on. This has been an absolute delight. Where can people find you on social media and read some of your writings and other research and stuff?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm personally on Twitter. It's Pahueg, Pahueg. That's where you can find me. And yeah, you can also find us on our webpage. It's schlossberg.co.com. Yeah, there you can find all our research, but maybe the best way, you just follow us on Twitter and or me on Twitter, and you will see everything we post. We have some really great things coming up, how to really understand the financial system, in a way people can understand it, because that's what I figured out. Many times it's just on a real hype that people don't really understand, so they turn away. And we want to bring Bitcoin and all the other things to the people and really explain it like many other people do that. And I think, that's really what we have to do. So yeah, just hit me up on Twitter. I'd be delighted.
And y'all can find me on Twitter with my name, Colin Harper, 1L, or @as I lay hodling. And thanks for tuning in, y'all, and catch us next week. Take it easy. Stay well, everybody.
A quick reminder that all of the content in this episode is for informational and entertainment purposes only. You should not construe the information as legal, tax, investment, financial, or any other advice. Nothing contained in this presentation constitutes a solicitation, recommendation, or offer by BTC Media, the Let's Talk Bitcoin podcast network, or any third-party service provider to buy or sell securities or any other financial instruments. Do your own research.